Let's get to some of the draft shapers, and we will start with West Coast. They're the club with picks 1 and 2 as things stand. They had a big trade period. They brought in Tyler Young and Brendan Starcevic, 2 defenders to add to that really solid backline group. But of course, they lost Oscar Allen, their co-captain. That was the big one, a free agency departure to Brisbane.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to go through the 4 clubs that are going to shape the draft most considerably right at the top end. Of course, West Coast has pick 1 and 2, so they have some decisions to make. Is it Duffma or is it 2 midfielders? So we all think Willem Dersma is going to the Eagles at pick 1. The question will be whether they stick to Cooper Duff-Tyler as the next best, as the ruck option. We know what he can do. He's more than just a ruckman. This is what we see here, some of his movement through the midfield and also up forward. He's an attacking beast when he moves around the ground, and he's shown that at a number of different levels now. So clubs aren't quite sure what they'll do with their second pick. The wide expectation has been Dersma 1 and then go with Duff-Tyler, which is the player still clubs most think is going to be the guy. But do they spring a late surprise and go with the 2 midfielders? They are pretty weak in terms of that midfield group, aren't they? Because we know over the last couple of years they haven't been able to really build out of that midfield. They've got Harley Reid there, of course, so he's probably the one that... Sorry. Just tip into the jar. They've got Harley Reid there. But what else do they do beyond that? Because they've got more picks to come, and do they try and squeeze up the order? Because they've got pick 13, 34, 41. They've got likely take in 5 picks, but might just use 4. So can they squeeze up to get that Carlton pick 9? I think that'd be something that would be on their target board. But they build out from the defence, as we know. These are the midfielders that could be in the mix if they do go more midfield.
Do you think it's Dyson Sharp or Sullivan Roby if they don't go with Cooper Duff-Tyler?
I think those 2 would be right in the mix. Yeah, okay. I think those 2 would be right in the mix. It's all about building for the future, but also knowing what you've got at the moment and how much can you support Harley through that midfield group. So that's where it sits at the moment. I'm not putting in for that one. I didn't say his full name. So Duffma or the 2 mids, that's the decision that the Eagles have to face.
That is a big question for West Coast. Let's flip the page and get to Richmond. They've got picks 3 and 4 as things stand. They brought in Patrick Retchko. That was that deadline day move. Tyler Young, they lost to West Coast, of course, though. Their big decision, though, is going to be bid or bust because they've got Zeke Hewlin, Dill Patterson, all of those types, Dan Annable, another one they could potentially bid on with these selections.
Yeah, that's the easy decision, isn't it? I mean, I think regardless of who's there, they bid. And I think there's a chance West Coast bids on one of the Gold Coast boys, in particular Zeke Hewlin. But if not, then I'd expect Richmond to go bang, bang, bang. Either it's Hewlin, Patterson, Annable, whichever sort of angle that is. Maybe it even is Harry Dean at that point. But regardless, it doesn't change who they're getting. They need some speed, we know that. And that's where Dill Patterson would actually be the perfect player for them. Not going to be the case. Because of what they drafted last year, you see what can complement them through this year's group. And that's where the draftee ranges these 4, I think. Sullivan, Roby, Sam Grill as the outside, more dash and run player. Xavier Taylor as the halfback defender / coordinator.
Yes.
He really sets things up there. And then there's Sam Cumming, who is a little bit different to what they brought through last year in terms of their midfield forward mix, Sam Cumming, because he can do both. He's pretty tough. He's got a hard edge in that group. Look at last year's group. The speed and agility came through Taj Houghton. They had some power through a couple of other players in Sam Lawler in particular, but none of that speed and agility. So, yeah, I think that's the big calls for them. Do they bid more than the block on Sunday? Yes, I think that's probably the case. And then there's the Kellaway conundrum, as we've spoken about. They've picked 38. I don't think that's necessarily brought in just for Louis Kellaway, though. So there's potential for that, but there's also potential that at that point they have a player that's rated to pick 20 or something like that. Sometimes that happens at this year's draft and in previous drafts at that point off the draft. So yeah, that's the group I think if the top 2 are gone in CDT and Dersma. If CDT got to the Tigers, I think he'd be almost a lock. Okay. That's the stop sign for him, I think.
That is a very interesting one indeed. All right, let's get to Essendon. They've got picks 5 and 6 as things stand. Brad Scott over there. They brought in Braden Fiorini. They lost Sam Draper. The big question for them is whether or not they can move either up or back. We spoke to Matt Rose, their list manager, right throughout the trade period, and he was saying they'd been looking at that. They'd contacted Richmond. They'd contacted West Coast to get back, getting higher up the board. Can they do it, Kel?
I don't think they move back. They're looking at moving up, so they'll take those 5 picks inside the 30. So 5, 6, 21, 27 and 30. Can they do it? Gold Coast's pick is up for grabs, that 15. The Brisbane pick is up for grabs, 17. Can they get a little bit higher and then use that pick to even nudge even higher than that? And is that something that would tempt West Coast or Richmond? I don't think they're going to be able to get pick 1 out of Richmond, West Coast. Is pick 2 more gettable? Potentially. They haven't put anything forward officially yet, but they have some decisions to make regardless. There's a view that if they had to sit back at 5 and 6 and just take the 2 players that are remaining out of Dersma, Duff-Tyler, Taylor, Roby, Sharp and Cumming, that'd be a pretty good hand,
Yeah,
wouldn't it? Maybe throw in Jacob Farrow as well as the halfback midfield runner. And then in that next group, I've got the sort of Lindsay, Schubert, Grill types. But I think that group plus the two at the top are probably the more favoured ones. The Calder Cannons boys, as we mentioned, the next generation academy players, a little bit like what we just spoke about with Louis Kellaway. It's where they're ranked. I don't think anything's locked in with this of these bidding situations.
Okay.
So Adam Swade, Hussein Al Ashkar, where do they actually fit? It's hard to get a consensus view on where these two fit. Some clubs have Swade a lot ahead of Hussein. Other clubs have the opposite. So, I think they're probably in that 25 to 40 range, but where does that actually fit in terms of where their picks end up? And some big calls for them to make.
They've got those gaps to fill, as you mentioned as well. A lot of list management holes there for the Bombers. All right, let's get to the final draft shaper, and it is Melbourne with picks 7 and 8. They had a massive trade period there. Stephen King over there.
He's happy to be here.
Looking very excited about it. They had a massive trade period, as we know. Judd McVie, Clayton Oliver, Christian Petrarca, and Charlie Spargo leaving the football club, but they brought in Max Heath, Chanquoth Jiath, Brody Mychek, and Jack Steele. The midfield mantra is going to be interesting here because do they need to build out of their midfield group, do you reckon?
Their trade period target suggests that that's a focus for them, doesn't it? With the interest in Sam Flanders, Marcus Windhager as well. And there probably is a couple of midfielders going to be there for them to at least have a consideration for. I'm not sure Sully Roby gets there, but maybe Sam Cumming does, maybe Jacob Farrow does, Dyson Sharp maybe as well. They're all in that mix, I would say, in terms of that top 10 group. And then Xavier Taylor, well, if he got to that point, I think any club at that point of the draft at 7 or 8 would have to really, really strongly consider Xavier Taylor at that point. Or do they go a little bit more needs? The Aidan Schubert key forward option or Lockie Doverston as a small forward, probably the leading small forward in it. Do they look at that point of the draft and say, well, we've got one, what's the other one going to do? But doubling up has been a big part of the strategy, hasn't it? 2 first-round picks across this year, the last year, 2 years ago, and also going into next year. So 8 first-round picks ahead of Tasmania's entrance. The King is here. How influential is he going to be on what the draft picks will be? So, they've got a good group to select from, and I think a couple of those ones will get through.